Tonight on 24, Tehran's new request from Washington for direct negotiations with America. GD Vance says America's red line is enrichment and the possibility of reaching nuclear weapons. Media reports. Media reports on Tehran's efforts to reduce tensions between the Houthis and Washington. The Jerusalem Post says Iran wants to accelerate negotiations with America through the ceasefire. Widespread reactions to Trump's potential decision to use different names instead of the Persian Gulf. Various political factions have criticized and expressed concern. And with ongoing tensions between India and Pakistan, New Delhi says it will attack more locations. Islamabad says it will not go unanswered. From the Iran International Studio, this is 24 with Fardad, Farahzad. This is breaking news. Viewers of Iran International in Iran and around the world, hello and good day. Minutes ago, the Times newspaper reported, citing informed sources, that the Israeli embassy in London was the main target of a terrorist plot linked to the Islamic Republic. This report was released following the arrest of several Iranian nationals in the UK on terrorism-related charges. At the same time, reports indicate that the Iranian ambassador in London appeared at the British Foreign Office after the arrest of Iranian nationals. The Iranian embassy described this as a respectful meeting and stated that the Iranian ambassador emphasized the need to respect the rights of the detained nationals during this meeting. Kamyar Matin, a professor of international relations at the University of Sussex, has joined us from Brighton. Mr. Matin, even now, the relations between Iran and the West, and specifically with Britain, are very tense and complicated. If these allegations are indeed true, what diplomatic consequences do you think it could have? Yes. Even before these arrests, regarding this potential attack on the Israeli embassy, you know that the discussion about declaring the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization by Britain had sparked heated debates in the British Parliament. And most likely, this recent development will reignite these discussions. Last year, especially after the start of the war in Gaza, and the conflict between Israel and Iran, as well as with Hezbollah, British security officials had also stated at that time that there was a possibility that these wars could indeed have some impact spread to Britain, because Iran might try to attack Israeli interests, or even Britain itself, due to its support for Israel. And it seems that this prediction was correct, and these arrests that took place on Saturday, according to reports published here, say that it was just a few hours before an attack these individuals intended to carry out against the Israeli embassy. Although initially, the news said they were supposed to attack a synagogue, the Jewish synagogue, but today the Times newspaper says that the target of these individuals was the Israeli embassy. The Israeli embassy is heavily protected almost everywhere in the world, especially in a place like Britain. The Israelis themselves have a strong intelligence service, the British intelligence services, which are very well known. In the past, the Islamic Republic had also attempted such actions in some Asian and African countries. But why do you think Britain, given the complexities that such an operation would likely have? The reality is that the Islamic Republic has good resources and sleeper cells in all European and Western countries. The reports I have seen here frequently pointed out that in recent years, especially after the Mykonos trial, the Islamic Republic had started using mafia gangs and organized groups, so to speak, engaged in operations that are essentially criminal in nature in various ways to attack its targets, in a manner that is, without using personnel from its embassies. But in the past couple of years, especially in the UK, it seems that Iran has returned to the same models it used in the 1980s and 1990s. Probably. The Islamic Republic has followed this path, and, in the news released today, it was mentioned that one of the individuals arrested has a very close relationship with the government of the Islamic Republic, and his family is among the very large capitalists. In Iran, they are the so-called owners of many factories and industries. Why they chose the UK at this particular time? I can only relate it to the feeling that perhaps the political climate here is not as intensely against the Islamic Republic. Due to the disagreements within the parliament regarding labeling the Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist organization, and also because the Islamic Republic might have been able to provide more facilities here in recent years. Thank you, Kamyar Matin, Professor of International Relations at the University of Sussex, joining us from Brighton. The Israeli publication Walla says that Abbas Araghchi, Iran's deputy foreign minister, has contacted Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's representative, and requested direct negotiations. According to this report, this action was taken after Tehran's disappointment with Oman's mediation, and if there is no agreement on direct negotiations, Norway's mediation is considered as an alternative option. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance, Donald Trump's deputy, said at the Munich Security Conference in Washington that the United States is seeking an agreement with Iran that would completely eliminate the possibility of Tehran acquiring nuclear weapons.
Currently, no country has a civilian nuclear program with the full infrastructure for enrichment that can enrich uranium to more than 90%, which is the level required for producing fissile material and nuclear weapons. Our proposal is very simple. We have no problem with nuclear energy production, but you cannot have an enrichment program that enables the creation of nuclear weapons. This is our red line.
Samira Karai has joined us from the White House. Samira, the American side had always said from the beginning that they were seeking direct negotiations. It was the Iranian side that kept saying these negotiations were through intermediaries. How likely is it now that the negotiations will become direct, and how serious is this Norway discussion?
Fardad, Ynet has published this report, claiming that Mr. Araghchi contacted Mr. Witkoff, and they are somewhat displeased with the Omanis. This is because the speed, or the quality, that the Iranians have in mind is not present in these negotiations. He contacted Mr. Witkoff to be able to have direct negotiations. We had heard repeatedly from the United States that the negotiations should be direct. The Islamic Republic insisted that the negotiations be indirect. Now, Ynet says that what the Islamic Republic had in mind from Oman's mediation has not been fulfilled. This is despite the fact that choosing Oman was actually the Islamic Republic's suggestion, and there was a positive precedent. Oman had previously mediated in 2013 as well. It hosted the direct and secret negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. Now, Ynet has published this report, and they say that the Islamic Republic intends to pursue this through Norway if what it wants is not achieved. Previously, Mr. Trump hosted the Prime Minister of Norway just in the past month. The United States has a good relationship with Norway. We have to see how serious that is. On the other hand, it seems that this discussion about the fourth round was mentioned a few days ago by Mr. Bighai, who said we are reviewing Oman's proposals regarding the continuation of negotiations, not the date for the fourth round. Now, how serious are the Omanis in contact with the Americans for holding the fourth round? And is the Islamic Republic dissatisfied with that seriousness? These are all questions that are unclear. In any case, this is the report we have now that Mr. Araghchi wants to speak directly with Mr. Witkoff. Previously, this might have been considered a red line for Ali Khamenei not to negotiate directly. However, on the other hand, efforts are still ongoing to clarify the United States strategy regarding the fourth round of talks concerning negotiations with Iran. From Israel's side, Mr. Dermer, the Minister of Strategic Affairs, has come here today. He was supposed to meet with officials from the State Department and the White House. He was supposed to meet with Mr. Witkoff to hear what the United States has in mind. There are also Mr. Vance's remarks. Mr. Vance spoke today here in Washington at the Munich Security Conference, which was held here in Washington. He spoke for about 5 minutes about Iran's nuclear program and Iran's expectations from the negotiations, and during this time, Mr. Vance was placed in a camp and a campaign alongside Mr. Witkoff. In interaction with Mr. Rubio, who advocates for the Islamic Republic to be given the right to enrich uranium so that an agreement can be reached. That is how much they are pursuing an agreement. The Witkoff-Vance camp is willing to even grant the Islamic Republic the right to enrich uranium. Today, in his remarks, he brought up some noteworthy points that actually bring Mr. Vance's position closer to Mr. Rubio's. As a result, it makes the United States' positions appear more unified. Mr. Vance says that the Islamic Republic can have nuclear capability or power, but it cannot have a nuclear program. There is no country in the world that possesses the entire infrastructure for enrichment. Meaning, if it decides it can enrich up to 90% and then not reach a bomb. The Islamic Republic cannot have this, but it can have peaceful nuclear capability. It can include Mr. Rubio's proposal. This statement by Mr. Vance that the Islamic Republic should import enriched uranium can include that the Islamic Republic is not allowed to use any centrifuge except the IR-1, which has a very slow enrichment process, and the Islamic Republic cannot reach 90% enrichment with it.
Thank you, Samira Guriai, my colleague from the White House, with us. Aram Hassami, a professor of political science at Montgomery College from Maryland, and Faro Kanani, a political analyst and sociology researcher from Frankfurt, are with us. Ms. Kanani, if it really is as Biden is reporting, do you think that negotiations, becoming more direct than they currently are, could provide a solution for the Iranian and American sides to reach an agreement?
It seems that the Islamic Republic is in a very self-assured position. The situation that the Islamic Republic is currently caught in, if you look at the game, is practically a carrot-and-stick game. That is, at least in a zigzag, verbal path, you see that American politicians are constantly on the move. On one hand, they promise a free market. The promise that if the Islamic Republic stops pursuing nuclear weapons and enrichment at that stage, they will likely lift the sanctions on Iranian markets and open up new economic relations for Iran. On the other hand, however, they threaten that not only must the nuclear issue be completely resolved, but the Islamic Republic must also permanently abandon long-range missiles and support for the Houthis. In fact, the situation you are seeing is that there hasn't been a consistent verbal promise in U.S. policy so far, and this is the part that might actually be making the Islamic Republic happy. Because it can maneuver on any of these issues that it favors and feels that maybe it can buy time this way. Something that is very important to it. On the other hand, the U.S., since it is actually playing a mediating role in every war happening somewhere in the world, from Ukraine and Russia to now being directly involved with the Houthis. In fact, it is somewhat hopeful that it can manage this crisis. Not because of any particular goodwill. It seems more that managing the situation is important to it. The situation with the Islamic Republic seems exactly the same. Therefore, what seems apparent is that I think most of what we need to recognize regarding the debates is happening behind the scenes. Why politicians like Marco Rubio have different speakers than Mr. Wentz, and each presents separate discourse and expectations in their debates with the Islamic Republic, is still not understandable to me personally. But well, that's politics for you. In politics, we can almost certainly say that we don't see absolute honesty. We see part of the story. As they say, we see the surface of the water, and what goes on beneath these discussions and what actually causes this carrot-and-stick policy, even among the American discourse, itself not to be a pure and homogeneous policy towards the Islamic Republic. It's still not clear to me, but I think if we are to identify a culprit in this matter, we should consider Mr. Trump himself as one. It seems like he just wants to leave a lasting impact in this realm. In fact, it's a kind of political bargaining. If you recall how he mocked those who signed the JCPOA in his discourse, he meant the American statesmen of the time. But now it seems that he would even be satisfied with something similar to that. In fact, it might seem that Trump's main issue was why he wasn't the one to sign that agreement. Something that is now being expressed differently from how it was presented at that time. But all of this is, after all, speculation about Trump. We have never been able to make an accurate prediction, considering the usually multifaceted personality of this individual, at least in politics. To be able to say we reach a definitive and correct conclusion
Mr. Hazami, how do you see GD Vance's remarks? Because he is also repeating now that an enrichment program that supposedly leads to nuclear capability is unacceptable, but it seems that there is still a degree of ambiguity in his remarks. He says that the type of enrichment that could supposedly lead to nuclear capability cannot be accepted. Will they, for example, accept 3.67? Where does this ambiguity come from? Why doesn't the American side give a clear, firm, and specific answer yet?
Well, the issue has been thoroughly dissected now regarding the verbal discussions and the language they use, the narratives they talk about. But let me talk about the statements of GD Vance. Look, this is nothing but what is stated in, actually, the NPT, if I'm not mistaken, Article 5.4 of the NPT commits to. I mean, this very statement specifically distinguishes between peaceful access and nuclear weapons. What GD Vance is saying is actually the same statement that anyone committed to the NPT treaty has the right to use for peaceful purposes or domestic use. Now, the issue of enrichment and then the additional protocol of the NPT and the matter of inspections and how the verification can actually be carried out is a delicate task. That's the discussion. I don't see a contradiction here. It greatly contradicts their initial statements, which was essentially the ceiling that it would be like the Libya model. Well, in my opinion, that Libya model is not on the table right now. So, if you can carry out enrichment below 14%, 3.6, it is part of the rights of all countries that have signed the protocol. That's how I see it.
Ms. Kanani, time seems to be against the Islamic Republic. The 2-month period that Mr. Trump defined, although it's not very clear when it starts, and when it ends, seems to be finally coming to an end. Next week, Mr. Trump will be in the Middle East. It seems that we are approaching the 11th hour of these negotiations. If you could give us an overview, based on what both sides have released to the media so far, what is your assessment? Are we really close to an agreement, or is the likelihood of confrontation higher now?
In reality, it's a very difficult prediction to make. Therefore, the Islamic Republic has essentially made some slogans, like nuclear energy is our undeniable right. This is a slogan we've heard for years. But we are sure that if the survival of the Islamic Republic is at stake, the cost that has been borne by the Iranian people over the years, amounting to billions of dollars, doesn't really matter to them. And if necessary, they will also set it aside. For them, survival naturally forms priorities 1 through 100. On the other hand, we must consider that Iran or the United States are not the only players in the negotiations. We have several other important players here as well. Take Russia, for example, which has indeed been one of the technical partners in Iran's nuclear interfaces. It has provided some of the most important assistance even up to the operational stage. However, in practice, a nuclear Iran will not benefit them at all, and if it comes to it, they will certainly abandon Iran in this matter, leaving the Islamic Republic unsupported in policy. On the other hand, we should not underestimate the impact of Israel. If we recall, at the beginning of the conversation, I mentioned the Libya model. Doctor, if we remember, when it came to long-range missiles, we know that this issue is not only about regional insecurity but also about Israel, which has been on the table in these negotiations. Long-range missiles are an option that gains value and importance in the negotiations. Now Israel has announced and repeatedly emphasizes this. You can see it in their media. Even in the statements of their officials, they say that if the negotiations lead to an agreement that could still allow Iran to be nuclear or does not reduce its malice in the region, they will act independently. Of course, you should consider that Israel currently has, as they say, many political and military entanglements, which might sometimes lead the Islamic Republic to view this claim with skepticism. However, we still know that this is a very strong and solid option, because it seems that the game that started in the context of Israel, especially after October 7th, is not one that will end halfway. And this time, Israel has a finishing stance. The effectiveness and strength of Israeli lobbies in the context of the White House in this matter at the negotiation table, and considering the relatively effective approach that the Islamic Republic's lobbies have had so far, I see this discourse difference from there. How they can actually tip the options on the table of the US and the Islamic Republic in favor of one of the two sides is something that perhaps in the fourth term, we should hope, will provide us with more information. I don't have an absolute prediction at the moment, but it doesn't seem that the human rights situation in Iran is particularly important to the US, or even issues other than the nuclear discussion. And that's not just in terms of nuclear energy. It seems more that the nuclear bomb is what matters to them at the moment. Therefore, I think that the US has not played the role it should have in this game, considering that they themselves have announced in their media that there have been severe criticisms regarding the first and second rounds of negotiations. The role that was expected from them to play against the Islamic Republic has not been fulfilled so far. Whether they will come to the table with full hands in the fourth round or not, we still don't know.
Mr. Hesami, naturally, diplomacy is not a 0 to 100 path. In the meantime, they might give some concessions, and take some. How much do you think the Israelis, who seem to be major critics of Iran's nuclear and missile program in the Middle East, might agree to something, like a slightly stricter JCPOA, where Iran might even enrich at 3.67%, but the Americans have more oversight, and necessarily, there might not even be a specific agreement on their missile program? Do you think this is something the Israelis would accept, considering that Mr. Trump might offer them other concessions? For example, perhaps normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia and a few other Arab countries, more weapons, defense systems. Do you think this package could satisfy Israel?
Yes, that's a very interesting point, and I think this is exactly the key issue here, and it explains some of the challenges the Trump administration is currently facing. In the sense that it addresses the angle that the neocons, who are actually in the Trump administration, have on the issue, for example, with Marco Rubio or J.D. Vance, in the sense that the neocons are more in favor of military action and cooperation with Israel to eliminate Iran's nuclear weapons program. Whereas Trump himself and the advisors and consultants close to the MAGA Republicans believe that, at this point in time, with the discussions Trump is having about world issues, opening a new front of war and attacking Iran's nuclear weapons would make things worse, exacerbate the situation. Therefore, I see a high probability that these changes are actually to pursue the second option and to appease Israel, essentially buying time for this deal to be made, and then if it falls apart, to put other options on the table.
Thank you both. Arema Asami, a professor of political science at Montgomery College in Maryland, and Faro Kanani, a political analyst and sociology researcher from Frankfurt. The New York Times says Iran has pressured the Houthis into a ceasefire with the U.S. to accelerate nuclear negotiations with America. Two Iranian officials from the Foreign Ministry and the Revolutionary Guards told the New York Times that the Islamic Republic, within the framework of Oman's mediation efforts, has convinced the Houthis to stop their attacks on American ships. At the same time, the spokesperson for the Iranian Foreign Ministry welcomed the halt of U.S. attacks against the Houthis and expressed appreciation for the efforts of the Omani government in this regard. At the same time, Israel says its conflict with the Yemeni Houthis is still ongoing, and according to Channel 12 of this country, a few hours ago, another missile from the Houthis was successfully intercepted before entering Israeli airspace. A Houthi official told Reuters that the recent ceasefire agreement does not include Israel in any way. According to this Houthi official, as long as the United States truly adheres to stopping the attacks, they will not launch any attacks either. Our reporter Arash Alay has joined us from the U.S. Congress. Arash, it's a surreal situation. Isn't it the case that the United States practically has a ceasefire agreement with the Houthis, yet the Houthis continue to attack Israel?
Well, I'll get into it. We don't have much time for the analyses that are happening in America. Those who oppose Mr. Trump and his critics, like The Atlantic magazine, say this is a sign of the America First foreign policy that Mr. Trump encourages. They say if you want to see what Mr. Trump will do in the rest of the world later, look at this. Agreement with the Houthis. Mr. Trump initially said he wanted to establish international shipping security there to prevent Houthi attacks on international shipping. Now he went there and bombed. He says the Houthis no longer only target American ships and are leaving the area. And in fact, the Atlantic magazine says Mr. Trump did not end this war. He just pulled America out of it. Now we'll wait and see if the Houthis keep the promise they made. They just didn't say that American military ships shouldn't attack. Mr. Trump says no American ship should be attacked. And how long this will remain stable is another story. Moreover, this happened so quickly that some American media say Benjamin Netanyahu was unaware and was suddenly surprised by this situation. Those who support Mr. Trump, publications like the New York Post, have written articles. They say this is the result and fruit of, in fact, the policy that Mr. Trump calls peace through strength. They say the same story happened with the negotiations with the Islamic Republic. Mr. Trump threatened. At first, Khamenei said no and began to take a negative stance on this matter. Khamenei's own advisors told him, if you say no, we will be doomed. Khamenei then said okay, and so they entered into negotiations. Now they say the same thing has happened with the Houthis. Initially, the Houthis resisted. American bombs were dropped on them. They were bombed every day. Then they said okay. Now, this story, according to the New York Post, will bring Mr. Trump closer to an agreement with the Islamic Republic, because it increases the pressure on the Islamic Republic. It lifts the burden of war from the Houthis in the Red Sea region, and it allows Trump to now implement other plans against the Islamic Republic.
Thank you. Arash Alay, our reporter from the U.S. Congress. Hassan Hashemian, an analyst of the Arab world from Washington, is with us. Mr. Hashemian, the United States and Israel are long-standing and strategic allies in the Middle East region. How is it really possible that there are so many attacks from the Houthis on Israel, and then the sitting U.S. president says, all right, we won't do anything with American ships. We won't attack them either? Even just a few minutes ago, news came that Mr. Trump said, we have dealt severe blows to the Houthis. They were very resilient and showed a lot of courage. How can this really be interpreted?
Well, this goes back to how effective the Houthis' attacks against Israel really are. We know that for over a year, Israeli ships haven't passed through Bab el-Mandeb, and for the Houthis to say that we attack Israeli ships, but not American ships, it's a bit meaningless because there are no Israeli ships there for them to attack. The missiles that are fired towards Israel, except for the missile that hit Ben Gurion Airport, the rest of the missiles have no effect and only serve the propaganda of the Islamic Republic and the Houthis. But in reality, the Houthis cannot hit an Israeli ship in the region in the Red Sea waters because there are no ships there, nor can they really deliver a significant blow to Israel with their missiles. Therefore, Mr. Trump knows to ignore this, but in return, he has gained very significant concessions from the Islamic Republic. Just consider that when the Houthis entered the Red Sea equation, they claimed they would continue this until the Gaza war ended. But now the Gaza war has not ended, and they have been forced to surrender to Mr. Trump. In addition, Mr. Trump's attacks on the Houthis eliminated about 600 of their mid-level commanders, which was a very significant blow to them. The situation they faced was almost similar to the void that formed for Bashar al-Assad after the disintegration of Hezbollah forces. It's true that the current Yemeni government, meaning the legitimate government of Yemen, is a shapeless government, and in fact, its prime minister was recently changed, and it can't attack the Houthis and change the situation. But it's possible that another group might emerge, like the one Ahmed al-Shabaab formed against Bashar al-Assad, and overthrow the Houthis. So it was in their interest to get involved in this issue. And interestingly, these talks coincided with the first round of discussions between the Islamic Republic and Mr. Witkoff in Oman. That is Mohammed Abdul Salam, the spokesperson for the Houthis, had gone there at the same time as the talks between Witkoff and Iraqi Oman were happening. At the same time, Witkoff had negotiated with Mr. Mohammed Abdul Salam, the spokesperson for the Houthis, and this negotiation was about stopping the Houthi attacks. Since April 28th, the Houthis have ceased their attacks on American ships, and after a week or 8 days, Mr. Trump announced that they are no longer attacking, and we will not attack them either.
Thank you. Hassan Hashemian, an Arab World analyst from Washington, with us. I repeat once again, moments ago, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, said about the Houthis that we dealt them severe blows. They were very resilient and showed a lot of courage. This use of the word courage has also sparked a lot of reactions on social media in the past few minutes. Following widespread reactions to the news of the possible decision by the U.S. president to change the name of the Persian Gulf, Donald Trump said a few minutes ago that he does not want this decision to hurt anyone's feelings. He said he didn't know anyone would be upset about this. Earlier, however, in response to this news, the Iranian foreign minister had condemned this potential decision by Donald Trump. Previously, the Associated Press and CNN had reported that Trump intends to use the term Arabian Gulf during his trip to Riyadh, which is scheduled for next week. Mr. Iraqi described this action as hostile and politically motivated on the X network. Iranian officials and well-known figures, including Tumaj Salehi, Hamd Esmailian, and Mohammad Javad Zarif, also reacted to this report and criticized this potential decision. Sharim Kaldi, a researcher of Middle Eastern history and international relations from Ontario, is with us. Mr. Kaldi, some of these names I mentioned are not usually seen together in a single news report. It might be one of those very rare instances where Iranians from every political spectrum, even figures from the Islamic Republic, agree that the name of this historical waterway is the Persian Gulf. Why do you think, especially at this critical juncture, Mr. Trump has said that he hasn't made a final decision yet, but has even considered such a topic?
I send my regards to you, sir, and to all the viewers of Iran International. Let me tell you that, President Trump, unfortunately for us Iranians who have been living under the rule of the Islamic Republic for over 40 years now, whether inside Iran or outside of Iran, he uses every tactic to psychologically confuse the opponent and gain concessions. And this should not be forgotten either. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates each have promised that. At least, now each of them.
I apologize to you for 15 seconds. Mr. Kaldi, I apologize to you for a few moments, because we have a live image from the Vatican. Right now, black smoke has risen near St. Peter's Square, and you can see the followers of the Catholic Church in this square, waiting for the new Pope to be announced. The rising of black smoke indicates that the bishops present in the Vatican have not yet been able to reach a final decision on selecting the next Pope. You are watching live images from the Vatican, and black smoke will be followed by white smoke in the coming hours or days. At that time, we can be sure that the next Pope will be introduced. I apologize, it wasn't really related to our discussion, but since it was live footage, I wanted us to see it quickly. Mr. Kaldi, I return to you and this controversial topic of the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Gulf, which has filled Iranian social media in the past few hours.
Exactly. Well, it should also be noted that Saudi Arabia and the UAE have promised to invest around $1 trillion in the United States over the next few years. Now, the amount may fluctuate and is not specified. But President Trump has always liked to have a partner who is willing to generously come and cooperate with the United States, especially in this tariff war, and then be able to use them as leverage in another negotiation-related issue. Why not take advantage of both? But the question that arises for me, as someone who knows the basics of law and has studied international law, taught international relations and international institutions, is this. The question I have is, let's not examine the claims of the United Arab Emirates from a historical perspective with all the documents and evidence that exist, considering that the Iranian government has always regarded these areas as part of Iran. It doesn't matter whether it's the Islamic Republic, whether it's the Shah's regime, the Qajar dynasty, or the Pahlavi dynasty. What do they intend to do with the archival documents of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company? After all, Britain had shares as an imperial government that was actually a supporter. And in fact, these countries, let me tell you, were not Sheikdoms. The Sheikdom ports were under British protection. In the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, in its archives, these islands were considered part of Iran. Let's say they don't consider all of this, not even President Trump. They also don't consider the agreement or the memorandum exchanged between the Qajar government and the British government in 1904 to 1905. Let's put all of this aside. From 1971 onwards, from 1350 onwards, Iran has been in control of these islands, and the Sheikdoms have not taken this issue to the court of justice. So the question that arises is, what is President Trump really after? In my opinion, he's after some sort of publicity. And if such an event were to happen where President Trump says Arabian Gulf, and then, in fact, in a way similar to how the European Union has come and said we support the UAE's claim over the island, he might also implicitly refer to it in this way. Then problems will arise. Israel would then have to withdraw from the Golan Heights. The issue of Karabakh should be taken to the International Court of Justice. What does President Trump want to do with Gaza? All these issues will then be raised again. And in my opinion, whether the Islamic Republic government is in power or not, Iran will have very strong claims, whether its basis is history, law, or force.
Thank you. I now see that Prince Reza Pahlavi has also posted on his social network and written, Iran's national heritage is not negotiable, with a picture of the Persian Gulf next to his own photo. Thank you, Shariam Khalidi, Middle East history and international relations researcher from Ontario. With the increase in tension between India and Pakistan following the deadly attack on tourists in Kashmir, Indian officials said they attacked 9 locations, some of which were linked to the Islamist militants' attack on Indian tourists last month. Pakistan called this attack an overt act of war and threatened to respond to these attacks. Pakistan says none of the targeted locations were militant positions. According to India, in the crossfire with Pakistani forces in Kashmir, 10 people were killed and 48 were injured. The UN Secretary General has stated that the world cannot bear a military confrontation between India and Pakistan. Meghan Shahidi, a researcher at the Political Thought Institute from Cambridge University, has joined us. Mr. Shahidi, many around the world are now worried that 2 nuclear powers have entered a military conflict, and this tension could escalate at any moment. Tell us a bit about its roots and how legitimate you think these concerns are, that this military tension might lead to a full-scale war between these 2 nuclear powers.
This issue, of course, has a long history, and one of the most recent incidents relates to the year 2019 itself, when a suicide attack occurred right in Kashmir, resulting in the death of 40 Indian soldiers. India responded by attacking what they claimed were terrorist group hideouts on Pakistani soil, and they have always accused Pakistan of supporting terrorist groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba or Jaish-e-Mohammed. But these tensions have a much longer history. In fact, Their history goes back to when Britain, as the colonizer of India, left India, and from that time, India was divided into two countries. In 1947, 78 years ago, one part became India, and the other part became Pakistan. At that time, the ruler of Kashmir, who was Hindu, decided to join India, even though the majority of the people in Kashmir were Muslim. And exactly at the border between India and Pakistan, this was the first war between India and Pakistan, which was a very large war. 1 million people were killed and millions were displaced. After that, it seems that significant events occurred between these two countries. Both of them became nuclear powers and conducted numerous nuclear tests in the 1990s. And again, in 1999, there was a conflict known as the Kargil conflict, where Pakistani forces infiltrated Indian territory. But India launched a counterattack and the Pakistani forces retreated. But the point that I think has caused these tensions to increase in recent decades is the rise of Hindu nationalism in India, which has largely promoted the slogan that India is for Hindus, with a strong focus on Indian history, myths, and the revival of Indian cultural and religious symbols. Such a trend was contrary to what India had 78 years ago, with figures like Gandhi, and during the period when India became independent, which had a secular approach. For example, we see today that this Indian nationalism, and on the other hand, in Pakistan, since the 1980s, especially after General Zia-ul-Haq's presidency, we have witnessed an Islamization, where at that time, Sharia was introduced as civil law in the country, and religious schools were established. And it seems that both countries are moving in two completely opposite directions from each other, and from the secularism they had 70 to 80 years ago.
But I think with the difference that Pakistan has a clear Muslim majority population, whereas India has various ethnicities and different religions. For example, in the Kashmir region, the majority are Muslim. One of the claims currently being made against the Indian government, especially by Pakistanis, is that, as you mentioned, not only is there Indian nationalism, but there are also degrees of what is claimed to be Islamophobia, and they are even trying to change the demographic composition in the Kashmir region.
Exactly, the event that made the situation in Kashmir more sensitive since 2019 was that the Indian government had a provision in the Constitution called Article 370, which recognized the autonomy of Kashmir. And under this Indian nationalism, specifically Hindu nationalism that I mentioned, the autonomy of Kashmir was revoked, which was contrary and caused severe dissatisfaction. Because many believe that this action was taken without the consent of the people and without consultation, and this led to the region experiencing much more tension and reactions from extremist groups, like the TRF group or the Resistance Front, which is a paramilitary group that essentially has older roots. In Lashkar-e-Taiba, an Islamist group, and is somewhat known as a Pakistani proxy group.
Thank you. Meghan Shahidi, a researcher in political thought from the University of Cambridge. And thank you for watching the 24 program. Let's end the program with live images from the Vatican. As you probably saw during the program, a few minutes ago, black smoke rose, indicating that the cardinals have not reached a final decision on selecting a new pope. It is possible that in the coming days, this final decision will be made and the next pope will be introduced. You are seeing live images from the Vatican, where many Catholics have gone after the death of Pope Francis. We end the program with these images